All right, welcome back to the last study hall of the year 2015 with this incredibly handsome cardinal and more of the same theme as before. Overall structure issues and INGs. Here's the source attribution. These problems are all from the free GMAT prep software, which is copyright GMAC. And here's where you should answer multiple choice questions. Please do not answer them in the chat box. Please don't do it. Thank you very much. All right, let's do one of these for your fun and edification. Let's try one. How about that? Right there. Remember where you find multiple choice answers. That would be right there. Give it a shot. All right, there's still a few people who don't have an answer to this. Should pick something. There's a question in the chat box about like timing. You should never think about having a timer on the screen. That's a huge mistake. If you ever have to look at a timer, that means that your time management is very bad. So that's all I have to say about that. But remember that basically time management is, there are only two things that are time management, which are be honest about when you are stuck, and if you are stuck, then move on. That's it. That's all time management is. It's nothing more than that. So, I mean, if you looking at a timer, and you should never keep a timer on the screen either. You should maybe reveal it to 1 or 2 or 3 times per entire section, like every 10 or 15 problems. And even then, you should never have to reveal it. It should just be something that you do as maybe psychological reassurance. Like, I mean, the analogy that I give is it should be sort of like double checking the locks on your door when you leave on vacation. Like it should not, like that should not be something you actually have to ever do. You just do it because you want the psychological reassurance. It shouldn't really do anything because the lock should already be locked, but you're just, you know, checking for the psychological reassurance of it. But, okay, I gotta adjust some text things here. It'll take me about 30, 45 seconds. Hold on a second, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. I had some tech stuff happening with my thing. I mean, remember that you should never think of timing on a per item basis because that's going to vary wildly. I mean, it's gonna, you know, there's going to be some problems that'll probably take you like 20 seconds. There's going to be other problems that might take you 2 minutes. You know, it's just. Averages are averages, but I mean, remember that this is not a test where you will have immense time pressure. I mean, if you do, then what that means is that you are sitting there staring at things and not making decisions. You know, that's what it means. You know, it does. You don't have to be fast because I'm not fast. I'm very slow at everything that I do, but I'm not patient. And that's really what time management boils down to on this test is lack of patience. A lot of people don't like to hear that, but it's the truth. It's time management is basically impatience. You just have to make decisions. You have to be done with them. So really, I mean, that's actually part of what they're testing for on this exam. I mean, like this is purposely an exam that punishes people who deliberate and can't make decisions. You know, it's, you know, especially people who are sort of these inveterate perfectionist types. The exam is very much designed to penalize that mentality because business also penalizes that mentality. And so it's meant to do that. Okay, let's discuss the problem. Okay, so when the entire sentence is underlined, okay. I mean, first of all, something a lot of people think, here's something lots of people think. Ew, gross. I don't like when they underline the whole thing. Does anybody here think that? Give me a smiley face if you think that. Because let me tell you something. You should actually like when they underline the whole thing. Because there are two reasons why you should actually like this. You should like it. It's a thing. One reason why you should actually like this is that there's more space underlined. There's more stuff. And normally when there is more stuff underlined, that means that everything, with everything else equal, that means that there's usually more stuff wrong with the things that are wrong. So, I mean, often more opportunities to eliminate. I mean, that's not always true, but it is very often true on average. But then, see, here's the other thing. One of the primary reasons why sentence correction is hard is because they take very easy mistakes, but they split them up. And they take things that are like super easy to understand, like my dog has fleas, or this is more as this instead of more than this. But people don't find them because half of it is in the underlined part and half of it is not in the underlined part. And this is the only time that that's not an issue. Like if the entire sentence is underlined, then this is the only time when you don't have to keep looking up and down and back up and back down, etc. I mean, it's the only time you don't have to keep doing that. Because, I mean, there is this issue of more distractions, but that can also get people into shorter parts because the shorter underlines still have to be related back to the bulk of what's in the rest of the sentence. So that is, because the underline is not, if the underline existed in isolation, then that would be a point. But because you still have to relate it to the rest of the words, that's less of a thing than it otherwise would be. But like the thing about these is that this is the only time when you don't have to look at half of a sentence and relate it back to another half of a sentence, which is nice. I mean, now let me tell you what I'm not saying. I mean, what I'm not saying is that you don't have to compare answer choices. I mean, you still have to compare choices. In other words, you still have to look at splits. So that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that you no longer have to connect the underline to a non-underlined part on top. So in other words, you don't have to read the sentence across a segregated distance anymore. So like smiley face if you see what I'm saying there. Because, I mean, that really, people underestimate the ability of that to make this harder, because, like, even things that are incredibly simple and easy to understand, like, more than and not more as, or, like, singular plural. I mean, even things like that can be difficult when you split them up across that kind of distance. So it's a much bigger deal than people think. So but we still need to find splits. And the other thing to realize is that there's a kind of split that generally plays a bigger role when they do this, which is, remember that there's two kinds of splits. Splits happen when words change, which is usually the first kind of split to which people are introduced. So splits can be words that change, but splits can also just be words that move. words that move are generally more important when the underline is longer. Because this is a lot of the time, this is what makes the underline so long, because they are moving around entire chunks of words. So you should be more attuned to this. Be more attuned to chunks of words that move when the underline is longer. Okay, so let's think about it from that point of view. Chunks of words that move, but in general, just looking at splits like we always do. So, all right. So here's the bones. The bones start this out. There's the bones, but then the bones are here, and then the bones are, whoa, that's not even until down here. And then here's the bone. Okay, let's go back to step one real quick. What is step one of every sentence correction problem all the time ever? What are we saying? Okay. Not necessarily a subject-verb check. Nah, that comes later. But yeah, what's the message? I mean, maybe you're right, because I mean, once you know what the basic message is, you should also know what the main core of the sentence should be. If that's what you mean, then yes. Like, what should the main sentence, like, what's the main message? Like, what is this sentence mainly telling us? What is the central message of it? If you can, you could figure out, yeah, the main message is that the bones of this dinosaur have been found. And then there's this like extra stuff. And like what you should try to do when you read the original sentences is you should try to like distinguish between central stuff and side points. So like, if you can, as much as possible at least, distinguish between the main message and side points, which are going to become modifiers as you read. So, because I mean, again, all of these things are mostly subconscious understanding when we read normal stuff. And that's what makes this challenging. I mean, we don't have to think about this stuff when we read normal text like books and magazines and stuff. But the main message here is that, you know, these bones have been found. So the bones of this specific dinosaur were found in Madagascar. And then, oh, here's some other stuff, side points. This dinosaur was a relative of blah, 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 and looks like other blah, blah, blah. Right? So, like, this is the main point. The main point is they found the bones of dinosaur in Madagascar. And then side points. Oh, yeah, by the way, here's some more things about this dinosaur. So, that, we can figure that out at the beginning. So, that should help us. Hey. So then we can color this stuff. So the bones should be part of the red stuff. Let's make that red. All right. And then, you know, this stuff should be the color of side points. Because these are the side points. We can analyze those later. But this is what, this stuff that I'm doing in this like aquamarine type of color shouldn't be the main message. So, okay. And the main message should be the bones have been found. Bones. All right. Okay, so let's see which choices survive that. Like the point is that the red part should be, from step one, which is what's the message. The red parts should form the main sentence. The red parts should not be modifiers, and they should form a complete sentence. And again, this is the power of step one, is that you can totally figure all of this out ahead of time. I mean, sometimes there will be more than one way you could write a sentence. Like occasionally there will be some things where you're not sure if there are side points or not side points. That might happen. But for the most part, it's going to be pretty darn clear whether something is part of the main message or not. So, and you can figure this all out. You can totally figure out ahead of time. So cool. Let's see if this happens. So the bones have been discovered in Madagascar is a complete sentence. That wins. The bones has been discovered in Madagascar. My dog's has, please. Well, now. No, thank you. Appreciate that. Subject and verb don't like each other in choice B. C, the bones have been discovered. Okay, that's a sentence. D, the bones of which is not a sentence, because that makes that a modifier. Nope. And then the bones of a bleeding desk have been discovered. Okay, that works. So, but in B and D, they're not a sentence. B, it's not a sentence because the verb is not the right verb, and D is not a sentence because it's not a sentence at all. It's a modifier. Okay. Now, where do we go from there? Anybody have any suggestions as to what we should look at next? Let's do, okay, what about the modifiers? What about the modifiers should we look at? All right. Which, when you say fragments, what is your clue that you should think about that? Because remember, you should never be thinking about stuff at random. So, like, what is your what is the reason why you are thinking about that? Okay, Jeannie is thinking about where do we put stuff. That's actually a pretty good idea. Because, okay, again, when we talk about words that move, yeah. When we talk about words that move, a big issue with words that move, in fact, we've had entire study hall sessions where this is the entire focus of the session. When words move around, a lot of the time they get put on the wrong thing. So you should pay attention to what describes what. So yeah, I guess Jeannie points out, right, a distant relative is the dinosaur, not the bones of the dinosaur. So, but what that sentence is accidentally saying is that the bones are a distant relative. That doesn't work. Yeah. So that's one reason to kill E. Antoine, can you tell us some more about fragments? Okay, so maybe you didn't mean, because E is not a fragment. There are some structural issues with the other choices. Let's put some stuff in color here. Let's use orange. Let's see. Let's use. There's no green on the screen yet. Here, green. What about that and that? That's interesting. So what's the deal here? I mean, we do need to have a parallel structure, but we also have to have something that works. So, I mean, remember, if you have a structure that looks parallel but it doesn't work, then that means it's not really a parallel structure. So, like here, okay. Let me make up an example here. How about this? How about something like this? How about this pottery, which was made in ancient Greece and holds about 1 liter of fluid, blah, 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 versus, okay, now I'm trying to make this sort of obvious here, but here. Okay, in the multiple choice area, give me, these are only fractions of sentences, but give me A if that is the one that works, and give me B if that is the one that works. Assuming that the rest of the sentence is fine, like the part that is dot, dot, dot. Assuming there's no problem in the dot, dot, dot part. And you give me in the multiple choice area, same place where you pick the other multiple choice stuff. Like not in the chat box. Okay, so there's a couple people who haven't picked a letter yet, but I mean, there was one person who had the wrong one, and that one person has switched over to the right one. So I mean, okay, it's definitely supposed to be A, right? And the point here is that the only way that you could possibly pick B is if you are just totally not thinking at all about what the words mean. So, like, 'cause if you look at these words, and if you just do not even sort of think a single thought about what they mean at all, like, if you don't think about the meaning of these words at all, then they might, quote, look parallel, unquote. But, I mean, of course, it's nonsense, right? But because, I mean, like, the pottery makes, it doesn't, you can't say the pottery makes. So, but the pottery was made in ancient Greece, yes, and the pottery holds about a liter of fluid, right? So this makes sense. This also makes sense. So we win. So like, the point is that, I mean, this is the reason why step one has to be step one. It can't be step later than one, because everything else, whether it's parallel structure, or whether it's sentence structure, whether it's tenses or anything, it's always subject to what are you supposed to be saying. Because you can't, like there might be words that look like they're really cool, but they're nonsense words. So the biggest lesson here is that step one has to be step one. This is why it's step one. So I mean, whenever everything else is judged subject to the meaning, right? Like everything else has to work as well as possible, as long as the meaning is still right. So meaning that this is not a parallel structure because it is meaningless, is the point. So if we go back to this, I mean, what are we saying here? So the message of this, and I mean, I guess it's not just was, I mean, it is, because it still is. They're related, they still are related, even though they're extinct. And notice how the word resemble is used. The dinosaur is a relative of the other dinosaur, and the dinosaur resembles other dinosaurs. That works. Why doesn't this work? I mean, you probably could resemble. You probably could use resembled in the past tense. You probably could. But where's the problem here? No, it's not the bones, because all of this could be describing this dinosaur here. So that's fine. That's getting closer. What Antoine says, because related is not a verb. Related is a modifier, right? I mean, let's take this to another. Take this to another thing. Another screen, because when you have parallel structures, they have to be doing the same thing. They don't have to be exactly the same grammar structure. I don't know why it's upside down. Let's turn it right side up. Okay. So here's the problem. Let's just take a look at this by itself. Let's not look at the second part of it yet. Just look at the structure of that. You guys see how that works? Because that's fine. I mean, this part is actually totally fine. You have, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, but MA, comma, distantly related to T-Rex. Notice that related is a modifier. This is not a verb. Smiley face if that makes sense. If this was a verb, it would be like it was related to, or is related to. I mean, related here is like close to. It's like similar to. This is exactly the same as here. I got a confused face from somebody. This is like saying this. Yeah. Related has exactly the same grammar as similar. It's like an adjective. So they're doing the same thing. So it ends with ed, but it's not a verb. It's similar. It's a modifier made from. I mean, you know, it's derived from a verb, but it's kind of like if you have a pressing issue, then pressing is not a verb either. Or if you have a hanging tag on your clothes, then hanging is not a verb. It's like that. So smiley face, if that makes sense. Related is a modifier, just like similar is a modifier here. Okay, so yeah, and now that's where the problem is, because that other part there is completely a verb. So, whoopsie. So we've actually got two problems here. I mean, the first problem, I mean, this is a verb, which actually creates two problems. The first problem is that it's not parallel to the other part. And the second part is that you can't use a verb as a modifier at all. I mean, it's not a sentence. So, why is it a verb? So look at the way they did this. I mean, it has an object. Like, they resemble these things. Like, if you say, here, if you say, I hit the ball, if you have something like this, then hit has to be a verb. I mean, you can have hit as a modifier. Like, if you say the fan hit in the head by a ball, was taken to the hospital. This is not a verb. This is a modifier. It's an adjective. But if you hit the ball, if you have a verb with an object like this, then that has to be a verb. There's no other. That has to be. That can't be anything else. Just because if you try to make a modifier that looks like this, you won't be able to make one. There are no modifiers that look like this, so I don't have an explanation of what that would be, because this is not a thing that exists at all. So, but it's like this is a thing that basically doesn't exist. You're trying to use a verb in a way that's not a verb. Hopefully with these simple examples you can see what the deal is, right? If you have hit the ball, then that has to be a verb. Someone hit the ball. And if you try to use that as a modifier, then it isn't going to work. So, yeah. If it said resembling, then that would work as a modifier. Yes, it would. In fact, if you had a sentence with those two, then yeah, this is a workable sentence. Dinosaur 1 distantly related to dinosaur 2 and resembling many of today's birds is blah, blah, blah. Yeah, absolutely. Because now these are two modifiers. Related to and resembling. Yes, that would totally work. So, yes, it does. Okay. So, but C definitely not a thing. So that leaves us with A. About that. Neato. Here. Okay. So, by the way, no. If you did that, then no. I mean, you actually can't do that, but there's. Okay. This is the point where I'm going to reproduce two of my favorite warnings from the forum. So hold on just a second while I go find those. Give me 30 seconds to find them. Okay. I'm going to find something on the internet. There you go. Here's one of them. Okay, so if you guys read my posts on the forum very much, these are going to look very familiar. Here's the first one. This is a question that someone asks. I think I've posted this, I think I've copied and pasted this onto the forum probably several hundred times. No exaggeration. Do not edit the official problems. Really don't do it. Just don't do it. I mean, one thing about this test that is surprising, it's not a thing that you can notice because it's a thing that they don't do. But one thing that is very surprising about this test is how few things are actually tested on it. Like, of all the things that can go wrong with an English sentence, I would say maybe 1% of them are actually tested on the GMAT. And even that might be an overestimate. So if you start changing sentences in random ways, then the result will almost always be wrong. And it will almost always be wrong for reasons that are completely irrelevant to this exam. Like literally every single time. So if you start making random changes, the answer is going to be nope, wrong, and you don't care about why. Really don't waste your time. The answer should be challenging enough as it is, and they are very carefully curated. And then also, guys, yeah, the other thing that you should not do, really don't do it, is this. I mean, A is the correct answer to this problem. Don't ask if the correct answer would be better if you did something to it. No, the answer is no. No, it would not. Really, no. I wrote this other version. Is it better than the correct answer? No, it's not. It's not better than the correct answer. I mean, I've been a professional writer for about 23 years, and let me tell you, the writing of these sentences is very good. These sentences are very well written and very well edited. If you make random changes to them, your version will not be better. Just take my word for it. Trust me. Okay. Glad we got that out of the way. All right. But that's not the same thing. I mean, if changing something would make it work, that doesn't mean that it's wrong without that change. Those are totally different things. You know, it's like if I added this part to my car, will it run? That doesn't mean it won't run without that part. So, but just don't edit the sentences. So don't do it. It's not a worthwhile endeavor. It's a waste of your time. Okay. Let's do another problem. Let's do it. Okay. How about this one? Right there. Fun stuff. Remember where you get the multiple choice responses. They're right there. All right. Probably pick something that is a thing. All right, let's take a look. So, remember, you should start from there. You should not look at things for a random reason. You should look at things for good reasons. So, I noticed that this changes forms big time. What does that make you think about? Like when you see those different kinds of forms of that, what should this make you think about? Notice that provide is verb. Are providers is verb. The rest of those are not. Okay, so there's a meaning thing too. We should think about that as well. So yeah, let's do the step one thing. But also, some are verbs and some are not. So whenever some things are verbs and other things are not verbs, you should definitely think about the overall structure of the sentence, because it's definitely never okay for something to be a verb but also not a verb. I mean, you can't have it both ways. Is the idea. I mean, it's going to have to be one way or the other. I mean, if something needs to be a verb, it needs to be a verb. It can't also not be one. Because the deal is that verbs are part of the core of a sentence, and modifiers are not. So it's one or the other, but not both ways. So, but let's go back and do. You see, it's talking about meaning here. So let's talk about step one. So yeah, what's the message? So what do they supply? So they supply drugs. And then, so here's this idea. There are three ideas here. There's the idea of drugs. There's the idea of sources of material and wood. And then there's the idea of employment. What's supposed to be the message there? Like forests, we know that forests supply drugs, sure. What about sources of building material? What is the source of building material and firewood? The forests. The forests are the sources of building material. They don't supply those. That's a very big deal. So, like, you would be wrong to say they like supply drugs and sources of building material, because they don't supply sources of building material. They are the sources of building material. So forests are sources of building material and wood. And in that sense, they provide employment for, so as a source of building material and firewood, they provide employment. So, like, in that capacity, as a source of building materials or wood or blah, 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 so in this capacity, in this capacity, they provide employment. There we go. Look at that. So in other words, step one, we should have a pretty good idea of how the sentence is supposed to be structured. Yes, we should. So, because they do switch up the main construction of the sentence in a couple of these choices. So, but think about how the main sentence should work here. The main sentence should say that forests supply drugs and provide employment. Because these are the two things that they actually give people, according to the sentence, right? And then because they could also say they supply drugs and supply building materials and supply employment. But if you notice that none of the choices are made like that. So instead, the choices all refer to sources of these. So given that restriction, like given that that's what is going on in the available options, we know that sources of building material and firewood should be like an add-on. It should be a side point. In other words, a modifier that's used to support this idea. Because that's where the employment comes from. I mean, they provide employment because they are sources of these things. So there you are. Okay. But even so, I mean, let's say that you don't catch on to that much detail. I mean, let's just say that let's see how far you can get with just, I know that I have to have a complete sentence. How far can we get with eliminate things that are not complete sentences? Let's just see, right? Okay. So, well, they supply things and modifiers, right? As sources that provide employment. Whoops. That's not a sentence. Like A is basically they supply drugs and period. Well, there's like nothing. There's nothing there after add except modifiers. All right. B, they supply drugs and sources of these are providers. So that's not a sentence either for the opposite reason of A. I mean, that's not a sentence because it has too many pieces. Like B is kind of like I ate turkey and soup and beans gave me lots of protein. I mean, you can see what the problem is here, right? This is I, verb, things, verb, things. I don't know what you would call that because it's not a thing that exists. So I mean, I don't even know the names of things that do exist, much less the names of things that don't exist. But this is not a sentence. So smiley face, if you can see the problem here. I mean, you basically have I, verb, stuff, verb, other stuff. Wow, that's not a thing. Okay. C has got the same issue as A. Because you've got they supply drugs and modifier, and whoops, there's nothing. You've got I mean, if you provide stuff, then you can also be a provider of stuff. I mean, it is more succinct to just say that you provide it. But there's, I mean, a provider, I guess, would be anybody or anything that provides something. So, but yeah, C is the same thing as just A. You've got they supply drugs and period. And you've got a bunch of modifiers after that, and that's all you have. Okay, and then so A, B, and C are not sentences. Like D is technically a sentence because it says they supply drugs and sources modifiers. And E says they supply drugs and modifier provide employment. So, okay. So D and E are, from a mechanical standpoint, sentences. The test does not test the presence or absence of commas. So there's not going to be anything that there won't be choices that are incorrect because commas are in the wrong places. I mean, you can use that. You can use the location of commas to help you like parse a sentence because, in fact, the fact that they don't test you on that means that you can basically trust where they put commas. But that's not going to be an issue. Mostly because if it were an issue, then it would be very strongly slanted against people from certain language families and not others. So they don't test that. So yeah, it's not a thing you need to worry about. But they will put the commas in the right places. So especially when the sentences are longer, you can actually use them as guideposts, as it were. So, but okay, the sentence that you have in D is forest supply drugs, and sources of material and wood. E is forest supply drugs and provide employment. Okay, so now this is where we go back to step one. Jeremy smiley face, does that make sense? The response that I gave a second ago. Okay. If you know what the sentence is supposed to say, like if you caught on to this, you're welcome. If you caught on to this at the beginning, then you know that it's supposed to be E, right? Like the sentence should say that the sentence is supposed to say that the forests are the sources of the building material and the firewood, and that they provide employment. If not, if you didn't catch on to that at the beginning, then you will have to think about it now. But the point is, because it is something so exact, it's not unreasonable that you would think about it. So, and the reason why D is incorrect is that it doesn't say something that makes sense. I mean, like forests don't supply sources of stuff because forests are sources of stuff. So that's not, it doesn't work. Whereas E, notice that if you had anticipated the way this was going to work, the E satisfies this absolutely perfectly. It's uses a side point to support the idea, right? They, as sources of building material and firewood, that's exactly how they provide employment. They provide employment through the timber industry and so forth. So there it is. Good stuff. I mean, the deal is if you really take your time in step one, I mean, the most important point about step one is that you should absolutely not rush it. You know, I mean, you should spend as much time as necessary to determine the intended message and therefore structure of the sentence as exactly as possible. And I mean, you know, because if you spend this time up front here, look how quickly you can breeze through the rest of this. I mean, if you can figure this all out right at the start. You can be like, well, I know they don't supply sources. So what are they doing with this? Well, there's only one other thing they could be doing with it, which is that it's something that like supports the idea of providing employment. And you can all that up front, you can figure it out because there's nothing else they could be doing with it. And then, yes, this will take extra time to figure out, but whatever extra time you spend figuring this out, you will more than gain back when you get to the choices, because you will pretty much know what the sentence has to be structured by. So, and also just don't think that you have to be fast. I mean, I know I've said this 100,000,000 times, but I am not fast. I mean, I have documented reading disabilities that are fairly severe. I'm a very slow reader, and I have no problem finishing this stuff. So if I can finish this stuff, you guys can finish this stuff too. But all right, let's see if we can knock out one more of these things. How about this one? Last problem of the year. Do it. Okay, I should pick a thing here pretty soon. I'll give you like 15 or 20 more seconds. You know, have something. Pick something. All right, let's take a look. So let's see. What is the deal? What's the message? What are you trying to say? There are basically two things wrong. What are they? A couple people are typing. Yeah, so there are the two problems are there's insufficient consumption of nutrients, and there's low levels of those nutrients in the blood. Okay, now if you think about it, if you didn't think about this at first, you would think about it when you see the way they're starting the sentences. And what I gotta run at the end of the time, so I'm gonna try to accelerate the discussion here. But notice the way that these things begin. You have some of them start with in up to this many percent of people, and some of them just start with this many percent of people. So okay, I mean, it says up to 40. Let's just say 40, just to simplify it, right? So, like, if we were just talking about the second one of these, you could actually do that either way. Like, consider, you could say 40% of these people have low levels of these nutrients in their blood. Or you could say in 40% of these people, the levels of these nutrients are low. Right, like smiley face if you see what I'm saying here. Like you could actually write that part either way. On the other hand, see, the problem with consumption is that consumption is not a thing that happens in people. And so this would be impossible to write with in. Because you can't say in these people the consumption is low, because that's not something that happens in their bodies. That's like, you know, what they do. So you can't write this one. At least you can't reasonably write this one with in X% of people. Because it's consumption. So that's how much they're eating. So just in terms of the intended message, it's not reasonable to say any of those three. Because it's not, you know, when you say in 40% of people, you're talking about like lab results, like inside their bodies, here's what's going on. So blood levels, sure. You know, bone density, sure. Blood pressure, sure. Not consumption of food. So, I mean, again, if this sounds like, oh, we're being nitpickers or we're being like super weirdly exact about this, I mean, we are being super weirdly exact, but there's a reason for it. It's not random. I mean, you're thinking very specifically about, should I have this or should I not have this? It's not, none of this is random thinking. So, and then, so if you think about the messages 40% of these people consume insufficient amounts of stuff or have low levels of stuff. So that would be E and not D. Notice nobody picked D. I mean, D is not even a sentence, because you have modifiers, right? Like D is up to 40% of people, modifier or modifier. I mean, there's actually no verb in choice D at all. Like 40% of people, and then there's just a whole bunch of modifiers, and that's it. Oops, that's not a sentence. I mean, basically choice D is up to 40% of people, period. Whoopsie, not a sentence. As opposed to, that's actually a verb, and that's actually another verb. So you actually have 40% of people consume or have stuff. So, yep. Notice beyond the impossibility of the first thing here, you have further issues with these other choices. Like in choice A and B, you have in these people do stuff. Like, so you're having, let's do that in blue. I mean, so above and beyond the fact that that's impossible in the first place, think about what you're saying there. Like, in these people, they do something. So that's like saying inside these people, they do. So people are doing stuff inside themselves? What? Doesn't make any sense. Nope. And then nobody picks C because you can see that there's a drastic non-parallelism between this and this. Those are not even sort of parallel. And there it is. But just notice the most important thing is the power of step one, right? Like you can figure out pretty much exactly, again, how the sentence is supposed to be structured before you even embark on exploring the choices. It's pretty neat. All right, that's it. Thank you. So best wishes for the holiday season to everybody. And the next one of these is not until I want to say January 13th or 14th or whatever that date is. So hope everybody has a most awesome holiday season and safe travels if you do travel. And that's it. Good afternoon, good evening, good night, good luck, good everything, good life. Take it easy.